if you were here 2 weeks ago, we talked about one of the ways that a guy responds to a controlling mom who's either still treating him like a little boy, or because he's not cooperating with that, she'll manipulate the situation, especially using guilt, to make him wish you were a little boy again. And so with that in mind, we even found out that Jesus had a mom who at times had trouble letting go. So if you live with a lady who's having trouble letting go of her son, or if maybe you look back at your own relationship with your mom, and there were times that even now she seems to want to treat you like a boy, then we're going to look tonight at the most important thing, and that's how do you deal with that wound. So if you'll all turn in your notebook to page 28, we're going to look at some suggestions for healing this wound. But before we do that, everybody take the little sheet that's on the table. It's a half sheet. I want to make sure that everybody sees this. We're giving you your questions to all of you. But a couple of things I wanted to remind you of. Number one is this Monday night in Masters Men. Now, for those of you who are new in men's fraternity, bless you, we started Masters Men for guys who had been, some of them had been with us for 7 years. And they said, we may not need to come every time to men's fraternity again, but we'd like to have something similar to it. So far we have seen the movie Monumental. How many of you saw that with us? Monumental. Phenomenal thing. In fact, my assistant and her husband, who's usually gone on Monday nights, sat down over the Thanksgiving holidays and watched it, and were just amazed at the background to our country and the kind of men and women that you don't hear about anymore in our public schools and in some of our Christian schools too, for that matter. And then to find out that there's actually a memorial statue, an 80-foot statue that gives the formula for what America is supposed to be doing and what we're about. So I hope you got to see that. If you didn't, you can check it out, and the library's ordering it, and so you'll be able to get it from in there. But this coming Monday night, we're going to see the movie. The title of it is Isaiah 9:10. And it's one of those verses that's hidden among some really, really outstanding verses that you've heard your pastors over the years preach on, about a virgin conceiving and how this light will shine in darkness, and the Messiah is going to come. And right in the middle of it, there's a verse that tells the people's response to all that's been going on in Israel. And it's with that in mind that a writer named Jonathan Cahn, K-A-H-N, who's a completed Jew or a Messianic Jew, wrote The Harbinger. And basically what he does is present a group of signs or harbingers about what Israel did not recognize about their discipline. And he brings all of that up to date, and then he relates all of that one by one, each individually, to 9/11 in the United States. I read the book in a couple of weeks' time, and was amazed at all of the connections and correlations between Israel in the 7th through the 5th centuries BC and America today. And the frightening thing is that if all of this continues to unwrap itself in front of us, somebody's got to step up and be a man and a leader, hopefully in this nation, but if not in this nation, at least in our homes and in our church. So Monday night, 7 o'clock, any way you can possibly be here, and any way you can bring somebody else with you. We'll meet in Fellowship Hall, so there'll be plenty of room. And I can promise you one of the most powerful messages that you will have ever seen demonstrated. You'll see pictures of 9/11 and all that went on at that time. And you'll actually get to hear the author of the book The Harbingers, Jonathan Cahn. as he narrates that part of it. And again, it'll be divided into two parts. So we'll end the year with the first part that tells basically the correlation between Israel and the United States in some ways that you probably never heard before in your life. Wouldn't you say, Larry? And then, Robbie, how far are you?
Halfway.
Okay. So, and already you're seeing some things in the book. His small group of men is going to be going through that at just about this same time too. So then the second half is on the financial situations in both empires, if you will. So that's Monday night, and then next Wednesday night will be our final session for this year. Now we'll start back in either the third or the fourth Wednesday in January, and we will get word to you in plenty of time and announce it in our church to have posters and everything else on it. And we'll finish looking at the wounds, and then we'll get into, I think, one of the most exciting studies I've ever spent in, and that's learning how to define manhood from God's perspective and to realize that He's given us two unbelievable examples that we've all heard of to show us what that definition is. In fact, I'm grateful to Lonnie for bringing up this banner from downstairs, and it gives the definition for those of you who've never been with us of manhood. But we're not going to go over it tonight because you'll have that to look forward to, and it'll be one of the most exciting studies you've ever had to apply to your life as well as to your children and your grandchildren. So, with that in mind, let's look at 7 suggestions for healing the mother wound. Now, just to kind of give me an idea of how we're doing here, how many of you had ever heard, before you came to men's fraternity, how many of you had ever heard of the mother wound? Anybody? Yeah. How many of you have learned some things about the mother wound since then that made you realize maybe more people have that than you even realized? Yeah, I hope you got that, because it's going to affect the way men respond to younger men for the rest of our lives. Because as we said, nearly 50% of all of the young men in America have no dad at home. And so somebody's got to be the mentor, the guide, the encourager, as Robert Lewis says, the male cheerleader, to encourage these guys when there's nobody else doing it. So we'll look at that together. So with that in mind, let's look at the first one of these. Some suggestions for dealing with this wound. Number 1, always start, I think it's point A in the workbook, always start with the understanding that breaking mom's over involvement, if that's the case for you. And again, we said we're not picking on mom. Number 2, this is not a matter of her not loving you or not taking time with you. In fact, it's usually just the opposite. Sometimes it's too much love and too much involvement. But begin with the understanding in your life, if you're dealing with it, or dealing with your sons or grandsons or one of your friends, that breaking this over involvement is good for you, good for your wife, and good for your mom. And it's going to be especially good for your kids in the long run. Because as long as we're tied to mom, can you guys see the board? You okay? All right. As long as you're tied to mom in some unhealthy way, whether it's large or small, it's going to stunt your quest for authentic manhood. So that's the first one. Start with the understanding it's going to be good for some people. Number 2, realize that your ultimate goal is to become a man whose vision is fixed on what God thinks rather than what mom thinks. And this also goes along with dealing with the father wound, because some have set a goal without even meaning to set it at showing dad how good we are, so that he would say, as I told you about my dad, so that he would say, I'm proud of you. And I had a dad who later got really good at that. But when I was just a teenage boy, my dad didn't know how to do that. Didn't seem to realize how important it was. And so, like a lot of dads, he was loving me by pointing out the things that I was doing what? Wrong. And didn't realize what it was doing to me. Now, so the second point is to begin to adjust to saying, I want to live my life according to what God thinks. Now that's if you have a spiritual relationship with the Lord, which later on we're going to look at that too. But if you're not, this will still help you, because one of the things that happens to us as we seek to please mom or we seek to please dad, and we get some positive reinforcement for that, if we're not careful, we'll spend our whole life trying to get other people to say, you're doing a good job, you're doing a good job, without realizing that maybe that becomes our motivation rather than doing what's right. So, with that in mind, number 2, to get to the place where God and what He cares about is more important than even what mom or dad or anyone else does. Jesus talked about this. Matthew 10:37. Look at what He says. He who loves father and mother more than me is not worthy of me. Now, to the Jews that He was talking to, that sounds horrible. What do you mean loves you, Jesus, more than I love my dad? That I was told back there thousands of years ago, honor him. And if you disrespect your mom, He's not saying disrespect your parents. In fact, He's saying just the opposite. He's saying, if I'm first in your life, you're going to learn how to respect and get along with your parents the right way. You're going to honor them in a very special way. So, our goal in men's fraternity is to reach a point where we say, God, what do you want in this? What do you want in my life? As we look at this a little bit more, getting into the second year of men's fraternity, God, what do you want me to do? I know what Dad expects me to do, or I know what Mom would like for me to do. We used to have a little saying, Harrison, I know you're familiar with this, with guys who were out at the seminary who were mom called rather than God called. Just trying to please and miserable and making other people miserable in the process in their ministry. So God, what kind of man do you want me to be? And I think that's personally the reason why you guys are here. And you're doing so well in consistency in being here. So with that being such a noble question, I'm hoping over the course of this year that you'll have an answer for that question. God, what do you want me to be? Even to the point of some of the guys whose funerals we've had lately who were charter members of men's fraternity. And in each case, they said, Charlie Kaiser said it, Jim Bannister said it, Pastor, I want to finish well. I want to finish well. And God will show us how to do that. Real manhood begins, write this down, when a man begins to ask this question, God, what kind of man do you want me to be? As a husband, as a father, as a grandfather, as an employee, as an employer, what kind of man do you want me to be? Now, when we ask that question, it becomes a matter of the will and faith rather than a matter of selfishly doing what makes me feel good for the rest of my life. Okay, so number 1, start with the understanding that breaking this bond, cutting these apron strings is good for you and for Mom. Number 2, asking God what He wants is the first step in stepping up to manhood. Number 3, stop complaining or struggling with Mom. Just stop. Just stop it. Because whenever you and I are complaining about anybody, we become their servant. You ever thought about that? If I'm bitter against somebody, and the writer of Hebrews says over there in the 12th chapter says, you need to check your life out very diligently, lest any root of bitterness spring up in you and defile your whole body. The Mayo brothers back in the 30s, the 1930s, found that somewhere around 30 different maladies of the body were exacerbated or begun by anger and bitterness. So it could literally mean that if there's bitterness sown in you, it's going to have an impact. It's the garbage in, garbage out principle. But the other thing is what the writer of Hebrews is talking about, and that's the church. How many of you have ever been in a church that had a bitter woman, or a bitter man, or a bitter couple, or a bitter Sunday school class, and literally it destroyed that entire church. I can name some churches that happened to. Group of deacons in the church where my dad worked for a while, literally because of their bitterness against leadership and them wanting to be the leaders, they literally destroyed that little church. And the church that I grew up in, that used to run 400 or 500 on Sunday, does well to run 40 or 50 now, and they're miserable people. It's a sad situation, and that's what bitterness does. So stop complaining, because when I'm bitter against you, let's say that Robbie and I have a disagreement here, and I feel like he's done something that's not right, and so I get really angry at him, and I begin to get bitter, and I begin to talk to others about it, and I reinforce it, and I find that the more that I talk about it, the madder I get. Where your wife, if you let her talk about some of her stuff, she'll get over it pretty quickly. That's why we'll learn in year 2, when your wife complains, what do you do, guys? What do you do? Oh, man, yeah. You don't try to fix her. She'll kill you. Yeah. And if it's somebody at work or whatever is the problem, and you start telling her what she ought to do, she'll be madder than hell at you. I can promise you that. You just tell her. So we found what John Gray said in Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, that the best thing to do when your wife begins to complain is just moan. And we know how to do that. We've been practicing that all of our lives, either from our mouth or other places. We know how to do it, make noise. So just do that. And I promise you're going to find it, when you do that with her, you're identifying with her emotion rather than trying to negate her mind. Because you got to remember, she has that left brain and right brain going at the same time. And we can't do that. So just moan a lot, and she'll think you are so smart. And we need that, don't we, guys? Yeah, we really do. Some of us need it more than anybody else. So, if you're angry at your mom, number one, if you tell people about it, you're going to find, I promise you, because we're guys, in 90% of the cases, you're going to lie about what's going on, because you forgot what made you mad in the first place. So you got to bring up something new, and so you make up something to go along with that. And then the more you have to keep this bitterness going, you have to keep watching her to find something else to find wrong. Now the same thing can happen on your job, is if you allow bitterness and anger in your life over somebody you're working with, or somebody who's your boss or your supervisor, you got to focus on them in order to justify keeping on feeling the way you do. And so you literally become their slave until one morning you wake up and you even look like them in the mirror. And there you go. So stop complaining about her. And if you have this wound, get the support and encouragement and the help you need from the men that God is placing in your life. I don't think you would mind me telling this, but how many of you know Jack Lewis, the good Jack Lewis we call him? We have 3 Jack Lewises in our church. We have the good, the bad, and we got them. Well, Jack Lewis, that's Bill's dad, some of you know Bill, is one of the nicest, kindest men I've ever known in my life. And he came to our church just about the time my dad died, and just kind of worked into being part of the dad role in my life that my dad had. And Jack and Jim Bannister, who died the week before last, became best friends, and it was so much fun to go visiting with them, because they'd go and visit some of the shut-ins, and I'd go with them sometimes, and we would talk to these World War II guys, and that they would go and visit, and they would pick at each other. Jim and Jack would just pick at each other all the time. It was so much fun. Well, they became great friends. And Jack was telling me yesterday at a meeting we had up here at the church on retirement and Medicare and all that stuff that I don't want to talk about. Jack was telling me, he said, I didn't realize how much Bannister's what he called Jim. I didn't realize what Bannister's death was going to do to me. And he kind of choked up. This is a man who's 82, 83 years old. And he said, I've never had a friend in my life like Jim. He said, I could talk to him about anything. I could say anything, and he wouldn't judge me or criticize me. And he said, and he could say, and of course, being an old Army command sergeant, Jim could put it right down there on the line, for you. And he said, and he felt that way around me. And he said, I miss him more than I realized I would. That's a great segue into what we're going to discuss in our first meeting when we come back together in January. But if you're having a struggle with some of this stuff, God will show you that there's some guys you can talk to who are not going to make fun of you or put you down for what you say. So talk to them, because Proverbs 27:17 is a verse that we'll refer to many times throughout the 3 years of men's fraternity. Just as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And that's what it does. And I can promise you guys who've never had a best friend, if you'll be open to it and you'll stick with us, you're going to find that God is more interested in giving you a best friend than you've ever even thought about it yourself. In fact, a lot of us don't want a best friend because we're afraid that they will find out about us, and if they find out about us, they'll tell somebody, or worse than that, they'll think little of us. But I'm telling you, God wants to give you that kind of friend. Look at what Jesus did when he got the apostles together. He picked some guys that left to themselves, they wouldn't have best friends. Simon Zelote, Simon the Zealot, he didn't trust anybody. He didn't trust the Jews, he didn't trust the Romans, and yet here Jesus goes after him because he needs a zealot, somebody who's zealous about the gospel. And so he picks that guy. And besides just coming to the Lord, he makes a whole bunch of new friends. Look at Matthew. What was Matthew's vocation? Tax collector. You think he had friends? No way. No way. He had a little short guy with a Napoleon complex who was his supervisor, Zacchaeus. And he sure didn't like Zacchaeus. And he didn't have any friends because the Romans didn't trust these tax collectors. The Jews didn't like them. So what does Jesus do? I need somebody who's a good record keeper. So what do? I'll pick you, Matthew. And in the process, you're going to make so many good friends that you're going to probably go farther in ministry than anybody else, because we're pretty certain that Matthew is the one behind the Christian movement in what later would become Great Britain. Amazing. But that's what God does, and that's what he wants to do with us. So if you're having some trouble with this, get some guys around you who are going to help you and who will sharpen your life. Now, to do that, to stop complaining and begin to do something positive, something that's directed with your mom and about your mom. And as I said 2 weeks ago, if you want to know if you've got a mother wound problem, you got a person who can absolutely tell you that you do. And guess who that is? Your wife. She knows. And she may be a little bit sarcastic when you ask her, hey, you think I have that mother wound? But be patient with her. Do what?
She'll be glad to.
She sure will. But she's going to be even prouder when you do something about it. And I'll show you exactly how that's going to work in a minute. So, if you're going to do something, you need a specific plan. And let me tell you what this plan involves. Number one, this plan for dealing with your mom, if it's your mom, or to help your son deal with his mom, this plan should address specific issues with specific applications that are troublesome to you. Let me give you some things that could be going on between you and your mom, even if you're both adults. It may be mom's interference in your marriage. If you've ever watched much of Raymond, you see the two women at each other all the time. And the reason is Ray's trying to play both ends against the middle, and it's a terrible place to be. Number two, it may be the excessive time demand she puts on you as an adult. Number three, it may be her excessive need for attention that she's not getting from her own husband. It may be her overbearing expectations. This one you saw in the video, her emotional manipulation. Most controlling moms use guilt as the number one manipulation. Mary used it. Son, how could you do this to your mother? I mean, I'm your mother. You see that? All right? Or maybe it's inappropriate remarks or criticism of your children or your wife's parents or your wife. Her unwillingness to release you or an unwillingness to acknowledge who you are now. And if you ever go through that with your mom, I would just wish you wouldn't treat me like a little boy. Chances are, one or both of you have the mother wound operating in your life, and something needs to be done about it. Or maybe she's living in some kind of time warp. She's miserable with her husband. Maybe you're the only child who turned out right, and yet she's in this time warp, and you're still a boy in her perspective. But you don't want to be that anymore. And God bless you for not wanting to do that anymore. All right, so that's the first thing. Specific applications and specific issues. I got some popcorn stuck right there. Y'all have that done? All right. B, 2. This plan should establish time-tested boundaries. If you do something about this, either verbally or just by your actions, and hopefully you don't have to go to verbal on this one, but they need to be there needs to be specific boundaries. Mom, this is the way it's going to be. Mom, we're not coming to your house this year for Christmas. No, we're not going to the enemy-in-laws either. We're going to have our own Christmas this year. There needs to be some boundaries set for all of that. And you're going to have to draw them up probably before she will. And you're going to have to establish those boundaries, not her. And you'll probably have to enforce them. So you're going to have to pray about them, you're going to have to plan them, and you're probably going to have to deliver those and then also enforce them. The challenge, though, is to establish boundaries. Write these two words down. That will follow the 5th commandment that God gave to Moses and the children of Israel, to honor your father and mother. So whatever boundary you draw needs to be healthy for you and honoring to her. And the way you find out both of those is ask the men in your small group. Guys, I got to work on this. I've had several of you come to me and say, you know what, I never would have thought that I had a mother wound. But I do. And it's not your fault, guys. I'm telling you, it's your fault if you keep on after you find out that this is going on. But in most cases, you were just a little guy when all of this started. And so you've been programmed to treat your mother the way she wants to be treated. But there need to be these boundaries, and we're going to look at what to do about that. But with guys, you would say, this boundary I'm proposing, is it too tight or is it too loose? Is it clear? Does it honor my mom and my relationship with my own wife? And is it fair in this situation? Then the third thing, this plan should include, now this is where the little boy is going to jump up in you, because it makes sense to us that we ought to have a plan and it ought to be clear, and we need to make certain that it follows some boundary lines to honor and still be healthy. But it should include clear consequences attached to the boundary violations. Once you've got the plan, it should be clear that if she violates those boundaries, there will be a price to pay. For instance, you might say to your mom, if you talk to my wife like you've been talking to her anymore, you're going to have to leave. I'm not going to have you raise your hand, but there are some situations where mom has to move in with you. But one of the things that has to be watched very carefully, what y'all say, God help you? Yeah. There have to be some boundaries. I'm going to show you in a second how to set about getting these boundaries. So, Mom, if you talk the way you are about my wife or to my wife in front of my kids, that's it. You just can't do that anymore. Or, Mom, I can't come over tonight. Yeah, I'd like to, but I'd rather stay home. I've got something to do. Or I can't come to your home for the holidays. I just can't do that. And I have other things to do, and I'll not keep addressing it with you. So don't call me through your grandson, because I've already decided what we're going to do in this family for this particular holiday. So you in essence are saying to her, this is the way it's going to be, and we're not going to talk about it anymore. And again, the little boy that's still inside some of us doesn't want to do that. Because why? There's hell to pay. What'd you say, Dan?
Hurt mommy.
That's right. That's right. But guys, remember, it's good for her, it's good for your wife, good for your kids, and it's good for you. That's the way it's going to be. Now, Mom, I love you, but I'm stepping up as a man. I want to please God with my whole life. And there are some things that I've got to begin doing. So some of you say, well, I need some help with these boundaries. Well, I'm glad you asked. Let me put a book up here. Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend still have a radio program nationwide. And these are brilliant, brilliant guys. And yet they're also very down-to-earth guys. And one of them's been through a very painful divorce in his marriage. But boundaries, it's when to say yes, when to say no, to take control of your life. If your wife or your girlfriend has a problem with her mother still controlling her, or the father was, this book will be good for her too, and she'll be more apt to read it than somebody she lives with. So you might just mention that to her. Now, so that's some of the help. Number 4, communicate your plans in one of the following ways to your mom, and then stand your ground regardless. Did any of you have a sister who would not let things lie? I mean, she would ask, and then she would nag, and then she would just keep on going and just never let up. Any of you have a sister like that? Yeah. Where do you think she learned that? Where do you think that came from? Her grandmother. And where do you think your wife learned that? Her mother. So, one of the things that's got to be done is you're going to have to communicate the plan and then stick up with the plan. Here are 2 ways you can do it. Number 1, maybe, this would be the easy way. This is their goal. The easy way is just in the way you relate to your mom. You just begin relating to her. You say, no, Mom, can't come over Sunday. We can't eat with y'all Sunday. We're going to do something with our son. No, you don't even have to tell her what you're going to do. You're a man, and it's your family. And maybe she may not like it, and she may try that a few times, but pretty soon maybe she'll get to the place and say, okay, he's a man, he's got every right to do that. Or maybe your dad will be saying that to her because he's been wanting her to let you alone a long, long time and let you be a man. So that's fine. Maybe just in the way you begin to relate to your mom, by the strength of your voice or the way you say it in an honoring way, all of a sudden your mom realizes she's dealing with a different person. And it's not her little boy. It's what? It's a man. It's a man. Now, if you find that she doesn't respond that way, and this is going to be the hardest for you if your mom is a single mom, because she's lonely and she's hurting. That's why we try the best we can when we have a widow in our church. We immediately set about to try to get her involved with a woman's group or with a ministry or Mercy Heart or something like that, so that they begin to feel some other type of directions in their life. Joe, you can give testimony, I'm sure, about some of the widow women that you guys have worked with in visiting our shut-ins, who that becomes their new family, and they begin to love somebody besides the person who's gone. So just begin to, even though she may not like it, stick to your guns, but you may have to do this, and that's a face-to-face meeting. And at that face-to-face meeting, I told you about me and my dad and our face-to-face meeting that I had to initiate. And you'll probably have to initiate this with your mom. Now, don't warn her, Mom, we got to talk and I'm coming over on Thursday. Don't give her a chance to get all of her weapons. She's got far more weapons than you do. And she can outdo you anytime. So you just ask God to set up a time where you can meet her when there be nobody interrupting. Maybe you take her to lunch and that shocks her. But you set up a face-to-face meeting. And it's fairly dramatic. And you again will feel the little boy stepping up inside you when you start trying to deal with all of these. If you're 40 years old, then it's been 40 years and 9 months that this has been going on, and you're going to have to war against that. But you begin to just say, this is the way it's going to be, and you'll have to put the little boy down and let the man step forward if this is going to work. But basically what you're going to say to her is, God has called me, and you'll find this out in second semester especially, God's called me to leave you, Mom and Dad, and to cleave to my wife, and to cleave to Him. And there's some things that I've got to do. I'm under orders from God. There are some things that are kind of like Ghostbusters. I'm here on mission from God. I've got to do these things. Or was it the guys in black? Who was it? Okay, all right. Whoever it was. Mom, I've got to do this. There's some things that I've got to do. God has called me to lead and to cleave to Him. And I'm moving forward, Mom, not backwards. I love you with all my heart. But there's just some things that I've got to do differently. Number 5. Use again these men, or at least a group of men, to report back to after you've done it. Have them pray for you, just like I had people praying for me when I got right with my dad, and as an accident got right with my mom at the same time. Had to do some follow-up with both of them, and they had to do some with me. But you talk back to the guys about, you think I did that right, or was I clear enough? And let them encourage you, and I promise you, every guy in here will be proud of you when you step up to the wound in your life. And I promise you, that's going to be helpful, especially if she begins to come down on you. You're going to need some guys who'll be these male cheerleaders. Number 6, if you're married. Now, guys, this may be next to the decision to confront this this may be not only the most important step for you to take, but it may pay the most benefits of any of these. The number 6 is, tell your wife that you think you might have a little too much involvement with your mom. And what did we say that she would say? Duh. Yeah. But you tell her right out. She knows it. But it's kind of like the Lord dealing with our sin. He knows all about our sin. But He wants us to deal with it. And He wants us to admit it. And to be willing to repent and to be changed by His Holy Spirit. So tell your wife you've got an over-involved relationship and an over-involved mom in your life. And so tell her you recognize the problem with an interfering mom, and this is key, and that you will deal with it. Now this is very important. This gets you in practice for confronting your mom. Honey, my mom is too involved in our lives. And I'm sorry, but I have yielded to her control and her manipulation. But I'm just telling you, I'm going to deal with it. And honey, I'm going to deal with it. I don't want you to have to be a part of it. So, in fact, I'm going to read you a letter that shows you that in just a minute. So you tell her that, and that you're going to take the responsibility to correct it, and you're not going to let her get in the middle of this. Because chances are she's already there in the first place. Because you're your mom's little boy. And it must be somebody who's causing you to be this way. So guess who's available? Her daughter-in-law. Okay? Now, so with that in mind, you tell your wife that you're going to do this. You ask her for her support and her prayer, but ask her not to get involved because it's your problem, not hers. Now, let me show you what will happen. Number one, write these down because I want you to see the possibilities here. Number one, your wife will be relieved. Thank God, I've been waiting 5 years to hear him do something about this, or 55 years to do something about this. She'll be relieved. Number two, she'll respect you and admire you as a man. Number three, it'll keep the pressure where it needs to be. The primary relationship between you and your mom, not your mom and your wife. Number four, it will cause your wife, this is important, to feel loved by you in a much deeper way. Even though you're concentrating on your mom, your wife is going to feel loved by you in a deeper way. And it'll cause her to respect you as a man and respond in a better way as you lead your family. Because there are some things that right after you deal with your mom and your dad wounds that you're going to want to deal with, especially if you have a teenage boy under your leadership. So it's going to make some huge differences. It'll only get you 1 point, but it's a good point, okay? All right, we'll look at that second semester about how you deal with these points. But she will admire you, and these are all great things. Would you say amen to that? Okay, all right. Finally, the seventh one, or F. In some cases, your efforts to establish a healthy relationship with mom will result in a time of emotional punishment. It may be silence. It may be screaming fits. It may be your brother or your sister getting all over you. Let me tell you something. The devil has been working at this family thing since the earth was first built. Whatever it is, she may get very, very angry with you. What I would advise you to do is not to be derailed by it, because, watch this, in time, your mom will adjust. And the reason she'll adjust is she has to. She has to. But what's going to happen, she will, especially if she's a Christian, she's going to feel like, man, my son has become what I've always wanted him to become, a responsible, godly man. And so she will adjust. So let me give you a letter that Robert Lewis gave us when we were just starting out in training for this. This guy's 40-something years old. I forgot, probably he's getting close to 50 now. But he was having all kinds of problems with his mom. His mom was a very angry woman, very controlling woman, very manipulative woman. And so he decided, as with teenagers of his own, that he was going to deal with this controlling mom wound in his life. And so he began taking steps to do that, and he wrote her a letter and gave the letter to Robert so that he could share it with us, and I'm going to share it with you. So listen to what this guy did. This is not the best way. The best way would have been to do it face to face, but in this case it must have been some distance between them. So he decided that he was going to write to her about this, and somehow I have left the letter. There it is. There's something. Dear Mom, here he goes. I want to be honest with my feelings about you. So I will throw away my natural timidity and say what I think. Where'd that come from? Where'd that natural timidity come from? Never being allowed to share their emotions. Psychologists would agree that one of the greatest steps a parent can take is to learn how to let their children express their emotions, especially if that child is a girl. Listen to them. So I'll throw away my natural timidity and say what I think. Many aspects of your recent letters to me are like the worst aspects of our adult mother-son relationship for the past 20 years. Two words come to mind to describe this relationship: domination and manipulation. Mom's a happy lady now. I feel like any time I resist your dominant will, then your response is manipulative, particularly to induce the emotion of guilt in me. Anybody understand that? Okay. Oftentimes in the past, this has worked, although to no one's satisfaction. Hopefully, we can now break this cycle. I promise you, I will continue to honor you as my mother. But I cannot fulfill your needs in any area. We can acknowledge this without going to the extreme of a totally cut-off relationship. Remember that. We can do this without cutting off the relationship. Most moms who are controllers will always go to the opposite pole. Like, okay, well, then you'll never eat another meal at my table. Or, I'll never speak to you again. Whatever it takes to get little boy to change his mind. He says, I suggest to you that if you find our relationship very painful, then your expectations from it are not proper. I had asked that we might have a right relationship as a mother to son before the Lord. But please recognize that as a grown man, I must follow the call of God to be a man, no longer tied so tightly to his mother. I must follow the biblical command to leave my parents' home and to cleave to my wife. And please don't use emotional manipulation techniques on me in the future, because from now on I'm resisting them. By the way, this letter is not from my wife. It's from me. I plan to let Betty read it before I send it, but only myself and you can be accountable for our relationship. Betty is neither the cause nor the solution to our relational problems. Well, that's just dealing with it. And she never has been, although in the past you have blamed her as the cause. This will no doubt, Mom, be a slow-moving struggle, but it's time to work on a new kind of relationship between us. I love you, and I await your reply. You think he dealt with the little boy pretty well? Well, pretty much, except he wrote it. We can really be tough when we're writing a text or email sometimes. Do what, Joe?
It's hard when you're face to face.
Yeah, it is. And you got to say no to the little boy, don't you? Okay. How do you think? Do what?
You got the other letter?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Mom wrote back. Robert didn't tell us how soon this letter came, or what method of post-haste mail she used. But here's the letter, and I'll let you kind of judge her response. Dear son, maybe there is no legal means for you to get rid of me as your mother. Wow. Or as a mother-in-law. but I can sure try to make it easier for you to be free of me emotionally. See if you hear any manipulation in here. I hereby grant you permission to forget I exist, or ever was, or ever will be a part of your life or the lives of your children.
She lies a lot.
You what?
She lies a lot.
Okay, all right. I realize that is the way it is anyway. He felt this division between her family, her children, her grandchildren. But just in case you occasionally feel burdened with the fact that I actually do exist, and you have to put up with me, I want to remove that obstacle from you. I'll admit that I'm not doing this just for you and the kids, as I am truly weary of the hostility and rejection, as well as the shattered hopes and dreams I had for us. I have waited so long for us to be friends. That kind of friends that I believe we once were. It's not easy to say goodbye to such an important part of my life, but you have really left me no choice. When I first heard this, I wondered, would she have written this letter had he not written his? Well, of course not. She's got him right where she wants him, and she's trying to keep him there. With all the love I'll hold in my heart for you both. How many people does both imply? Two. Nothing said about the grandkids. Isn't that amazing? Or the other brothers and sisters who are pulled apart by all this mess. Signed, your ex-mom. P.S. I know how Jesus felt when he spoke in Matthew 23. Oh, how I've longed to gather you together as a hen gathers a chick under her wings, but you were not willing. I know how Jesus feels. That's tough, isn't it? But here's what Robert told us. He said the guy held on, and he held out, and he stuck to his gun, and the mother, in time, adjusted and realized, as she told him, I feel like I've received a new man in my life, as well as my son. That's one of the reasons God called us guys into men's fraternity. This is a fraternity brother. I don't know his name, but I know he lives in North Arkansas, somewhere around the Harrison area, up there in the beautiful mountains. But she got back a man as a son. Now, let me close by taking a hard right, and that's the rest of your notes. The critical need today is for fathers to call out their teenage sons from dependency on mom to manhood. I'm just going to mention this briefly because we'll talk about it in second semester. Just kind of tuck this away. Dad, your teenage son needs to be called away from mom. If your grandson is involved in this situation, you need to ask God for wisdom to help you know how to help him pull away from mom's control and maybe manipulation in his life. What that means is just a few things. Mom's not going to wake them up in the morning. Mom's not going to take them out and buy their clothes for them anymore. Mom's not going to cover for their mistakes at school or at the bank. Mom's not going to become the counselor of their boyfriend-girlfriend relationships. Mom's not going to be setting appointments for their haircuts. Mom's not going to be paying their bills. Guess who's responsible? If you're not careful, that little boy will step back up and say, hey, I don't want to do all this. Yeah, you do. If you're a man, you really do want to. There comes a place where you, Dad, need to call your son to you and away from mom. He needs to set his own alarm. He needs to either have you take him to buy clothes or you give him the money and he goes and gets them. let his hair grow over his ears if necessary until he decides it's time to get a haircut, and let him take care of it. It's not time for mom to be mom to a teenage son in a way that she's caring for him like he's in elementary school. It's time for him to grow up. You'll be calling him into authentic manhood. And you'll say, well, how do I do that? Well, I'm glad you asked that, because we're going to be telling you. You're going to see immediately when we look at this definition that that's going to be one of the greatest ways that you'll ever be able to share with your son what your heart is and how he can really become a man. So, let me give you 3 points. As he gets into his teenage years especially, really it's better before that. Maybe when he's 3 or 4 years old, you call him away from mom, you have a little manhood ceremony for him then, you give him his first pocket knife or his first, in some of your cases you've given them guns, but whatever. You have it early in life, and then you do later like Larry did with his grandson and his own son, to have a ceremony for them. So this call to your son or your grandson, number 1, needs to be clear and direct. You'll say to your son, I want you to come join me as I'm learning to be a better man. And you'll be able to define what manhood is to him. And if you're saying right now I don't have a definition, you will, and you'll be able to do it very clearly, and it'll be exciting. Number 2, this call needs to be embraced by you. It needs to be embraced by your wife, his mother, and it needs to be embraced by your son. So there's going to be some discussion ahead of time with mom about where she needs to back off as he moves into his teenage years. And then number 3, as Larry has told you about his grandson and his son, his own son, that needs to employ ceremony, and we're going to talk to you about that. So let me close with 2 comments. Number 1, these legs of masculinity on which a man stands. We've talked about they're either weak or they're strong, but they're established at and by the home. And we want to make those legs as strong as we possibly can. And let me just say this to you. I mentioned this 2 or 3 weeks ago when I wrote a tribute to my mom right before she died, and I didn't know she was going to die. If you've been raised by parents where a dad took you under his wing and began to raise you like a man, and a mom who would let you be raised like a man, even if she was a single mom, she got mentors for you or other men who would come alongside you and encourage and help you. Thank them for that. Just thank them. There's not a man in this room who doesn't love to be thanked when you've done something right, because we're told so many times what we've done wrong, right? So thank them. And for those of you who have legs that are hurting and shaking or maybe missing altogether, my plea with you, exhortation to you, is that you'd take responsibility for that. And then go out into the world, even with those hurts and bruises and amputations, and show the world a miracle. Stand up and be like a man. Last thing, look at page 92 for a second. This is the only homework you'll have in men's fraternity, and that's your manhood plan. I talked about this briefly about 4 weeks ago, and I said start thinking about where you are in relationship to your parents. That's part of Roman numeral 1, a look back, and just fill in the blanks here. Put them on your computer if you can, but begin to start a manhood plan. Your graduation in the last of April or the 1st of May is to turn in your copy that you've made for me of your manhood plan, and then also have one ready to read in your small group. So this would be a good time during the time that we're not doing men's fraternity to spend an hour on Wednesday night to look back over this, and then to begin to look at now, part 2, how do I evaluate myself in light of the biblical definition of real manhood? And we'll get to that probably the middle of February and get into that. And then look ahead. This doesn't have to be a long, wordy thing. Golly, I received some that I still hadn't finished reading in the second year we did this. I mean, thick thing, because some guys had never told their story before. So it's a way to do this. Work on your manhood plan, and don't give up on it. Even if you just do nothing more than fill in the blanks there on those 3 pages and make a copy of them, or bring them up here and we'll make a copy of it. Just at least take a look at your story. Because remember what we said when we first started? Everybody's got a story. Unfortunately, most of us have never told it. Worse, some of us have never even thought about it. Father, I thank you for this time with the guys and for their faithfulness and being back after the holidays. Now, Lord, next week is going to be an exciting time because we're going to get to hear what you've been saying to each of us in our lives in these 8 sessions that we've spent together. Now bless the small group time now in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you guys. Thank you for coming.
Don't help.
Yours do all 3 Roman